Well, it's such a pleasure to be with all of you today. I want to say how happy I am to be here with all of you and have this opportunity to share another portion of God's Word with you. We had a nice trip up to Kentucky to see the Ark and the Creation Museum. And so I've had several ask me before I left about having lessons on the Ark, and several mentioned Wednesday night about giving you a debrief on the Ark and what we learned and so on. So the first lesson today, I'd like to talk about the Ark of Noah and a biblical and scientific look at the Genesis account about Noah building the Ark and how they survived that 371 days in the Ark while the flood was upon the earth. And in the second lesson, look at the judgment that is involved. Really what that story is about is the judgment of the world because of sin, and how that judgment foreshadows the great judgment day that's yet to come, that is going to come on the last day. There's other evidence, you get to looking at this subject. There's a lot of books written about the Ark. Also, there's lots of evidence about did the flood happen? What's the physical evidence? And Lord willing, maybe look at that next Sunday morning in the first lesson. Look at some of the evidence that this flood happened that we can see in history and in the geology of the earth and in the things that we see as we travel across the country and so on. So looking at the Ark, we're told that a great flood came after about 1,600 years after creation, after a great population had filled the earth, that men had become corrupt, and that great wickedness was on the earth, and God was going to send a great flood. He was sorry that he had made man, and he preserved, though, to keep his promise of a Savior. He preserved Noah and his family. And Noah needed to build an ark for the salvation of his household in order to preserve himself alive, along with all of the air-breathing animals that have nostrils. We're told in Genesis chapter 6 and verses 14 through 16, make for yourself an ark of gopher wood. You shall make the ark with rooms and shall cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you shall make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits, its breadth 50 cubits, its height 30 cubits, and you shall make a window for the ark, and finish it to a cubit from the top, and set the door of the ark in the side of it, and you shall make it with lower and second and third decks. So the Lord revealed the great catastrophe that was going to come upon the earth, and he told Noah what he needed to do if he wanted to be preserved, and by faith, Noah did according to all that God commanded him to do, so he did. We're just given a brief outline about what happened. The Bible, one of its characteristics is it'll deal with world-shaking events in just a few verses sometimes. And even though there's several chapters on the Ark, we really don't have great details about it. The word ark, tuba, is the word in Hebrew. It means an open container or a box. It's used for a basket. And the Egyptians spoke about a sarcophagus. They used the same word. And a lifeboat is really kind of what it all works out to. We have two accounts of the word being used in the Bible. It's used for Noah's Ark, and it's used for the ark that Moses was placed in, and Miriam watched over to see what happened to the baby Moses in the ark. So it was a basket of some kind that would float. So it's not necessarily a box. So we think of it as a ship that was built, that was going to go through the sea. And the Egyptians, of course, they look at the afterlife as something that you had to prepare for. You put the body in this sarcophagus, the place to preserve it, and then they would go to the afterlife. Well, Noah's going to go with the ark from the old world before the flood to the new world that he's going to dwell in, and it's going to be through this ark or lifeboat that he is to build. It's to be made of gopher wood, There's you look it up in the dictionaries, and they say unknown wood, that we don't know what the wood was. The world was a different place before the flood, and a different climate and different continent. Probably just one giant continent before the flood. There was the water in one place and the land in the other, and so quite different vegetation and so on, a lot that was growing at that time, different kinds of wood maybe than what you had after you came out of the ark. Some people say it was cypress wood and put a question mark on it. We don't know for sure if that was the wood. I guess if you were using wood after the ark and thinking, well, that was the best kind of wood you could have used, but we don't know. We don't know about that wood. He was to cover it inside and out with pitch. Kopher is the word that's used for pitch. It means to cover. Most often it's translated in passages that talk about the atonement, that the blood covers us from God's wrath and we're clean from our sins. But it's also used to talk about the pitch that you would use to waterproof something. So it's waterproofed inside and out, the wood that he used. They used a sticky resin from trees, tree sap and gum that they would make waterproofing out of. Also, bitumen, like we would get oil products from, or asphalt and stuff, that they would use that for waterproofing. So we don't know for sure about exactly what the pitch was made out of either. Could have been either one of those things or something else. The shape is not described for us, and a lot of the books written and sermons preached since 1960, there was a book came out, The Genesis Flood, by Morris. And he was a hydrologist and Christian scientist, and he wrote an excellent book that most all preachers I know probably have that book. It was a great book about the flood and the ark and how it could have all worked and so on. And in that book, it's just sort of a rectangular box. And then when you go see the ark that they built there at in Kentucky, they have thought about it as a ship, and I think that's probably the right idea, that it would have been made like a ship because of some of the things that are said about what it was going to do. There was going to be a mountain covering flood that would cover the whole earth 15 cubits above the highest mountain that existed in the pre-flood world. They evidently weren't near as tall as the mountains are today. And it moved over the surface of the water. It had to be able to handle wind and so on. So those scientists and engineers that looked at the ark story, they designed the ark with the proper kind of bow on it to help it stay straight in the water and cut through the waves. And also they have this big fin you can see there sticking up on the back of the ark, so that the ark would stay going into the waves instead of like a box would kind of turn parallel to waves. It'd be very rough ride with the big waves hitting in the side. That these ancient people were very smart, and they try to imagine, from ancient shipbuilding, what Noah and the people that were working with him to build that ark would have thought of and prepared for. And we've all seen weather vanes and how you can build them to where they'll point into the wind, and you can build a ship the same way, where the wind will turn the ark into the wave the right way and help it survive and get through that terrible storm. We have some early drawings that are on pottery of the ark that goes back in the ancient days of Mesopotamia, and it kind of has that shape to it. So, is that a memory that was handed down about the ark? A lot of the ancient ships, they have this big structure on the stern of the ship. Were they just copying what Noah did when they started doing that? Is that the way they built the ships afterwards for a while? Anyway, how large was Noah's ark? Some of these things, you just have a brief explanation of it. 300 cubits. A cubit is from the tip of your finger to your elbow, but they had different ways of talking about a cubit in building big projects like Solomon's temple or some of the temples in Egypt. They would use what they called a royal cubit, which would be the tip of your finger to or the elbow to your tip of your finger, and then your hand on top of that would be the royal cubit. This is about 18 inches. That would be 20 inches and a half or so if you do it the other way. So you have different figures in different books and tracts and things that have been written about the ark and different studies about its length according to which size of cubit it's talking about that they were using at that time. I think the one I'm using here and they use at the ark exhibit encounter is the royal cubit, the 20.4 inch cubit, which would make it 510 feet long and 85 feet high, 51 feet wide. And you can see it was about as big as you could build a wooden ship. There were some large wooden ships that were built in the 1800s. The Great Eastern ship, the one that laid the transatlantic cable, was nearly as long as the ark, and it was made out of wood. So they had they've been some big wooden ships. We have in ancient literature talk about very large wooden ships that, carried some of those big pieces of Egyptian art, those obelisks and stuff. The Romans really loved those, so they shipped about 5 of them to Rome. Gigantic pieces of stone. They had to, what size ship, move those giant things over there to Rome to get them set up. I think in the 1800s they moved one a few blocks, and it was like this big engineering feat. And the Romans did it back there in those days, had 5 of them, and moved them all the way from Egypt. So these people were smart. They knew how to build things and do things, and we oftentimes don't give them credit. Think about if you had 900 years to live and became a shipbuilder or an engineer, and you could just keep building your knowledge stack and your skill stack all of that time. How smart would you be? We know in the ancient world they had ways of cutting those blocks of granite and stone to build the pyramids and drill holes through them, and we still don't know how they did that. Some people say it's so precise and all, it must have been aliens came down and helped them carve them. They were smart. That's what they did. And they were smart when they built the ark, I'm sure. They knew what they were doing, building that ark. Its cubic volume is the same as 522 railroad cars. One of the most impressive things about having to build the ark and see the ark is just go, wow, this would work. You could get a lot of animals on this ark. There's no doubt about it. And it's said that you wouldn't need, we're going to see, maybe a fourth of it or a half of it to get each of the kinds on the ark. One of the things that's interesting that has been done by a hydrologist and different people that study, the stability of ships and put them in these wave tanks and all of that, that's been going on for the last 60 years, studying the design of the ark. And they've done that with these dimensions that was given to Noah by God. And it turns out it's like the perfect combination to make something that will be comfortable for people as much as possible without sacrificing stability where it would flip over, and to make sure that it had enough strength that it wouldn't break apart. And so if it was too long, it'd be very comfortable, but it might split in the middle. And if it's too broad, then you'd be spinning around all over the place out there in the waves. And if you have it too tall, it capsizes. So isn't it something that here in the Bible you have Noah and you got Moses, the one that wrote it down, that he's got something that's a great plan, right? How would he know? He's a shepherd or somebody that works on the land. He wasn't a shipbuilder, but yet here's this great description. I remember years ago reading a study about barges that were built in the 1600s to go up and down the Rhine River and other things in Egypt or in Europe, and they were built on the same dimensions, and talking about how stable that was and how effective it was, built at the same dimensions as the ark. These different things that were built. Of course, it does sort of look like a big oil tanker type of shape even that we see today going around the world with all that oil in it. So how could Noah build the ark? Is the reason we ask some of these questions, and it's good to take your children to see some museum like this, or read some material, or watch some videos, hear a sermon about some of these feasibility things about the ark, is because people have tried to ridicule the ark. It would be impossible, and they make the story as difficult as possible to where you couldn't possibly have built an ark that big. It would have broke apart and all of this. And a lot of the skeptics have written things ridiculing the account. So it's good to have engineers and scientists that show you, yeah, it could be done. And to actually build something and show you what it would look like. So the Bible doesn't give you all the details about how he built it. But what does it say about Solomon? Solomon built the temple. Did Solomon build the temple? Solomon built the temple, but did he do it all by himself? No, he had 7,000 workers working on the temple, and people that were experts in every different area, and that brought wood from all over the place. That's how Solomon built the temple. So it says Noah built the ark. Does that mean he had to drive every nail or put all the pegs in it, and he did it all by himself? No, he was a patriarch and lived all those years. He probably put all his wealth, it wouldn't do you any good, would it, once the flood came, and built that ark. And he may have had all kinds of helpers. He had 3 sons that could help him. How long does it take, 4 men to build a house? It doesn't take all that long, does it? Just 4 men. What if you had years and years? What could you build, right? And then if you can hire all the people you want to hire, how long does it take you? So you have to think about all of those things. So the physical and mental strength. I think God picked out a man that was well gifted to do the job, don't you think? That he picked out a man that would be able, if he didn't know everything about building ships, he probably could learn it. And he got Noah to do that job. Gave him the basic plan, and then Noah had to execute that plan. And these people were brilliant people back at that time, as we can tell from the ancient world. I would think the closer you were to the time of Adam, they were probably smarter than any of us today. They had more probably just basic ability, and that the way, as you get further away from the perfection of God's creation, that things get deteriorated. They were probably pretty sharp in the way that they could work with wood and metal. Don't we read about Tubal-Cain in Genesis chapter 4 is already making musical instruments and making things out of brass and iron. So they had all of those things too when they were building the ark that they could use to secure it and strengthen it. And these ancient builders, again, highly advanced. We see all kinds of examples around the world of pyramids and different things that have been built in cities by the Egyptians and the Chinese, and over here in the Americas, that show those people that came out of the ark. They had some great skills that they passed on to their descendants, and they were building fantastic things right out of the, after they came out of the ark. They brought all the animals, or the Lord brought the animals to the ark. One of the things that I can remember in the movie The Bible that we went to see back in the 60s, I think John Huston was the director of that, and they were out trying to wrangle all the animals, and Noah was chasing them and trying to drag them onto the boat, all that. That's not what happened. That's not what the Bible says, is it? The animals came to Noah. He didn't have to go look for any of them. And there's lots of people try to ridicule the Bible. That I read a number of accounts this week where they would say, well, what about the marsupials that had to come all the way from Australia to get on the ark? Or what about these animals that were here? They had to cross the Atlantic Ocean to get to the ark. The world was not the same at that time. There was just one continent. And then they will try to ridicule the account by talking about all the species that there are on the earth. Well, they'll count like, every different form of a cat as a different species. So they multiply the number gigantically to try to make the flood story and the ark sound ridiculous, that you'd have to get so many things on there. But that's not what it says in the Bible about what he put on the ark. He chose the different kinds, not the different species that we categorize things as today. This is many several thousand years ago when they didn't use those terms. So, completely different map. And we do know that God's built into animals this homing instinct and migration instinct. I don't know how God did it. It doesn't tell us how he, through his providence, and directed these animals to go there. I know he has almighty power to do whatever. There's nothing impossible for him to do. And he got the animals there, and the right animals that needed to survive to repopulate the earth. All flesh that moves on the earth perished, birds and cattle and beasts and every swarming thing that swarms upon the earth, and all mankind and all that was on the dry land, and all those in all in whose nostrils was the breath of the Spirit of life died. Thus he blotted out every living thing that was upon the face of the land, from man to animals to creeping things and to birds of the sky, and they were blotted out from the earth, and only Noah was left together with those that were with him in the ark. So if you got pictures of where would you put the blue whales? Doesn't say anything about any of things that live in the water being on the ark. Right? That's not mentioned. Not every species. It says every kind. A kind is more related to what we call a family of animals today. They're animals that, at least in the past, were able to interbreed with each other. They're related to each other. And we recognize those kinds today. They're horses and dogs and cats and so on, and there's great diversity among each of those kinds that were in their genes. They were, loaded with genetic material back there at that time. And as they got off and lived in different places and got isolated and inbred with each other, then you got different kind of cats maybe that can't interbreed anymore. But back in the beginning, they could. And there's charts that they put up to show, well, this kind of cat can interbreed with this one. And this one can interbreed with that one. And this one can, you can kind of link them all together in the whole world that way. And, of course, there's a lot more study needs to be done about all of that. But we could look at a lot of animals and go, that's a cat, right? That's a cat kind. And you only had to have 2 of those. You only had to have 2 of the dog kind on there. So when you get to reducing it down in that way, you can see there weren't as many animals on the ark as they try to picture and try to ridicule the Bible with. And, again, they look at the overall creation scientists have looked at these different animals. They come up with about 1,400 kinds of animals when you boil it down to these different basic groups of animals that you could have started with when they came out of the ark. Just think about all the different shapes, eyes, hair color, skin color, everything human beings have. We're all one race of people. We're not all these different species of human beings, are we? But we got all of that diversity that was inside those first people that came off the ark. And again, you end up losing genetic material when people get isolated and inbred in one area. They lose some of those qualities that they had in the beginning. So you've got fossil animals. They figured about 54 amphibian kinds that are extinct now. Reptiles, 211. Mammals, 78, or mammal-like reptiles, 78. Mammals, 314. Anyway, we go through the numbers there. Then those that were still around after the ark, calculate all of those different kinds. Try to make it as big of a number as, try to be fair and not limit it too much. I know that instead of just 2 bats, they had like 5 different kind of bats that they were counting because they're a little different from each other. So anyway, even being generous, there was enough room for all of these animals on the ark. 2 clean kind and 7 of the unclean kind were taken on the ark. So animals that were right to be, eaten and sacrificed to God and so on, those animals just 7 of each kind. The other kind of animals, 2 of each kind were taken on the ark. And you shall take with you of every clean animal by 7s, a male and its female, and of the animals that are not clean, 2, a male and its female, also of the birds of the sky by 7s, male and female, to keep offspring alive on the face of all the earth. So you have about, I figured up, you count it that way, 4,297 animals. If they were 7 clean, you put those together and multiply it, you get 6,658. Some of them count 14. That 7 is the way it is in Hebrew. There's a few translations that make it that they were putting 14 of each clean animal on. And they use the bigger number when they're talking there at the ark. I think it was 7, but that's what most of the translations have. But anyway, you get the size of the ark. Just on half of it, you could put 16,200 sheep-sized animals, and most animals are way smaller than sheep, right? And it's pointed out, you probably put juvenile animals on there. Why would you put a full-size elephant if you could put a couple of young elephants on there? And wouldn't they be more resilient? We know how it is if you fall down. If you're old, you break things. And if you fall down and you're a child, they got the, much more durable as far as breaking bones and things. And you'd be able to breed for longer and be better when they come out of the ark if they were younger and smaller when they went in. So there's a lot of things. You wouldn't have to have a brontosaurus, full grown. You could get 2 little, we know how small their eggs were. You get small ones and put them on there and have to keep them alive for a year or whatever. So juvenile small animals, they use less space. They're eating, their waste would be less. Be easier to manage them when they're young. Easier to, I guess we could have Greg talk about lion cubs versus a full-grown lion, right? A lot easier to handle when they're little and whether they're big and so on. So, I'm almost out of time already. So, say a few more things. Maybe we'll just have to continue the latter part of this next time. One of the objections that's brought up were, 8 people would work themselves to death feeding the animals. And again, people have a lot of ingenuity today, don't we, on doing things automatically, whether it's milking cows or whatever. We come up with ways to one farmer can do a whole lot of things nowadays, right? So they were smart back then too. As for you, take for yourself some of all the food which is edible and gather it to yourself, and it shall be for food for you and for them. Some have speculated there would be some hibernation with these animals in their cages and so on. A lot of inactivity with the animals. Some animals have a torpor when they're not moving around, different lizards and things. Some of that would happen. But they built rooms. The word room, when you look it up in the Hebrew dictionary, and of course all of us can do that on our phone, it's the word nest. They make these individual cages, nests, the little dwelling places for the animals to live in, and they, I'm sure, use great wisdom in doing that, making that. You have all of this bulk food that was put on there, 17,125 cubic feet of food, it's thought was what was needed, or 400 tons of food, and it would again easily fit in less than half of the ark. You could put all of that food away and store it in the different areas that you needed to store it in. They probably had large silos and bags and sealed earthen vessels that they would use to feed the animals. There's ways that they show there at that exhibit where you could have chutes and things that you pour the food in, and it would load up several different cages all at the same time. Don't we know how to do things like that? If they could think of it today, don't you think they could think of that kind of thing back then? And Noah could have constructed a proper feeding and watering system that he could use. You'd have to have drinking water for Noah and his family and those on the ark. There certainly could, they had the capability of doing plumbing and all of that back then, just like we do, to bring down water from the roof. Rained for 40 days and 40 nights. There was fresh water for sure. And then after that, don't you imagine, there was still a lot of water. The ocean was warm. And there's still a lot of rain going on off and on, I'm sure. Just an inch a day would be enough to take care of the ark and the people that were on it, that big roof they had. So they could have channeled that into different kind of cisterns and things to store water for them to be able to drink during that period of time. So You can picture the different ways in which they could have watered these animals and kept them alive. Waste removal is something that's oftentimes ridiculed, but they had ways that they could channel that waste down and then be able to pump it up and out of the ark. You had different ways of pumping water uphill and taking care of things in that of that nature. One thing that was talked about, I'd like to look into more, this moon pool where you have water, actual holes that came in at certain places in the stern of the ship that would pump this water that was in the bottom of the boat in and out and purify and take care of some of that waste that was there and help ventilate the ship as it's moving back and forth as they go through the waves. That's a technology that they had and they could have used. So, again, just gives reasonable explanations. Light sources and ventilation. The word for window, it literally means double light or moon or midday is the way that word is translated. Almost like let's get the picture of like a skylight or something, that's pointing up at midday, some way or another to help light the inside and to provide circulation for the air. I'm sure it was with great ingenuity. They knew how to build furnaces and billows and all the different things that you need to draw smoke and air and move it around. And it was designed in such a way by Noah and those that built the ark to where they got the circulation of the air through that ark as they moved along. They had a covering. It talks about that Noah removed from the ark after it landed, and they'd been in the ark for a certain number of days. And that covering, it could have been something translucent that they had on there as well. They had oil lamps that they could use that give off very little fumes or smoke. And Noah did according to all that God commanded him. We have the brief description. There could have been much more detailed of this where God filled them in on. We just have the little part that's been recorded for us and handed down all these years later by Moses. So much more went into it. One thing to bear in mind in all of this is that God was helping them. They weren't out there on their own. God had a plan and had a purpose, and you can't thwart God's purpose. He's going to work with them to make sure they're preserved through that flood. As horrible as it was, that ark ended up in the places it needed to end up and so on by God's providential care. He preserved those animals. He's the one that closed them in there, we're told in Genesis 7:16. Those that entered, male and female, all flesh, entered as God had commanded him, and the Lord closed it behind him. God closed the door and sealed it. So there's miraculous things involved in this as well. And in Genesis 8:1, in the middle of all of that flood, it says, but God remembered Noah, and he remembered them to care for them. That's the idea of remembering somebody. Remembered Noah and all of the beasts and all of the cattle that were with him in the ark, and God caused a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters subsided. The water kept going up and maintained its height for 150 days. And then it began to go back down, and the wind began to blow. And God was remembering them, keeping them alive. And he was the one that told them when to get out of the ark. Noah wouldn't move out of that ark till God said to leave. And they were, after they landed, it was many days before they came out of the ark. And the earth was dry enough and vegetation had started growing again before they came out. Then God said to Noah, saying, go out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons' wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing of all flesh that is with you, birds and animals, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, that they may breed abundantly on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. Of course, they were greatly blessed by God and multiplied and replenished the earth. Well, I have to stop there. We'll look, Lord willing, maybe next time at some of the evidence of the flood, maybe the distribution of these animals after the flood and so on, if we have opportunity. If you'll bow with me for a word of prayer, we'll be dismissed to our class.